This is the 5th episode in my series on Tarabala. So far, the first 4 have concentrated on interpreting individual Tarabala. Now, in this episode, I'll start something new, and I'll introduce the extremely useful and important phenomenon of Tarabala pairing. As we learned in episode 1, Tarabala is based on distance. It's based on how many nakshatra separate 2 points. Well, the distance from point A to point B is always the same as the distance from point B to point A. So the Tarabala from point A to point B will always result in a corresponding Tarabala coming back to A from B. So what A gives to B determines what B gives back to A. This is a very important concept in understanding how to use Tarabala in natal charts. In this video, we'll begin our exploration of Tarabala pairs, starting with the first pair, which is in a sense the simplest pair. It almost doesn't even seem like a pair. It's called Janma-Janma. Janma means born or birth, point of origin. And it's the name of the Tarabala that results when planets are in the same nakshatra, when there's 0 nakshatra separating them. So, for example, here we see Mercury and Ketu are both in Magha. So there's 0 nakshatra away from each other, and so Mercury is giving Janma Tarabala to Ketu, and Ketu is giving Janma Tarabala to Mercury. Now, how do we interpret this? Let me start by just explaining how you interpret Janma-Janma in general. Janma-Janma means born together. So we can describe the planets that have this relationship as siblings or inseparable siblings. If you think clearly or carefully about sibling relationships, you'll understand the relationships that planets have in Janma-Janma Tarabala. They live together, they share a room, they share the same food, they share the same parents, yet they fight with each other because they're always in the same room. So planets that are in Janma-Janma Tarabala are exactly like that. So this means when you look at a chart and you see the Janma-Janma Tarabala planets, you're looking at where the native has love-hate relationships between different things or different aspects of life. From one aspect, we're in love with something, and from another aspect, we just hate it. If we explore a few examples of this Janma-Janma Tarabala, we'll get a better feeling for what this really means in practice. So let's do that now. We can start with this example that we've already mentioned, Mercury and Ketu in Janma-Janma, because of both being in the same nakshatra, Magha. So what you do here is you just decode the simple symbolisms of the planet and the nakshatra. So start off by saying Mercury is intellect and Ketu is introversion. There's various keywords you could have picked for Mercury and Ketu, and you can experiment with all of them, and you'll get different nuances of the interpretation. But let's go with these primary keywords of Mercury, intellect, and Ketu, intuition. So intellect and intuition have a sibling Tarabala. So that's telling us that for this native, intellect and intuition live in the same house. They maybe share a room. They eat the same food. They eat at the same time. They share everything. They're inseparable. And also they fight with each other. They get on each other's nerves. So to flesh this out more, I would say that clashes between intellect and intuition annoy the native. They frustrate the native. Whereas harmony between the two really empowers this native. So when the siblings are getting along, then they empower each other. But when they fight, they frustrate each other. So a native with Mercury and Ketu in Janma-Janma will feel like so irritated when intuition and intellect go in separate ways. When scientific things can't tally with spiritual things. On the other hand, when they do get together, the native is turned on, active, empowered. And they have a power to do that, to merge the intellect and the intuition. So as I mentioned, there's other keywords for Mercury and Ketu, and you can explore all of those. For example, you could say Mercury is about relationships, interaction, exchange, but Ketu is about isolation. So if you apply the same kind of template for interpreting that relationship and isolation are siblings. So how do you make it very real to explain it to this native? You can say something like, you really get along better with people who have space for introspection, who give you space to be quiet. People who aren't always demanding speech, who aren't always demanding interaction. You get along well with those people. Because there you have Ketu and Mercury living in the same room harmoniously. But the people that are very loud, the people that demand you to always be interacting with them, the demands for interaction, these are the things that frustrate and get in the way of that native. Now, besides the planets, we can also interpret the nakshatra. We can add the character of the nakshatra into our evaluation. What Tarabala gives us is a description of the relationship between the planets. What the nakshatra would add to that is a description of the home in which that relationship occurs. So, for example, in this case with Mercury and Ketu, we have siblings. Tarabala is telling us these are siblings. And they live together in the same room and so forth, in the same house. What room? What home? They live in Magha. Magha symbolizes heredity, loyalty to tradition, loyalty to authority, etc., stuff like that. To interpret it fully, it's not just that the two of these planets are trying to get along, but both of them are also trying to get along with their environment. Their environment is becoming a part of that struggle to get on each other's nerves and to empower each other. And that environment is what the two of them share. So this person gets frustrated and gets kind of snagged when either group, either the intellectual or the mystical, is not staying in touch with or in roots with established precedents, like intellectuals that ignore textbooks, or spiritualists that ignore spiritual tradition and make up their own garbage. But the native really has strength when all three of those aspects harmonize and work together, like scientific thinking with religious philosophical thinking, harmonized in the context of Magha, authentic tradition. Then that native is empowered. Let's look at another example. Sun and Mars both in Pushya. So let's do the same thing that we did for Mercury and Ketu and see if it works here. The Sun symbolizes leadership, Mars symbolizes strength. And so the relationship between leadership and strength for this person will feel like the relationship between siblings. So this native will not like and will not do well in situations where either party, Sun or Mars, leadership or strength, tries to exist independently of the other. So you would expect this person to be somebody who can follow leaders who lead because their authority is obvious and they don't overstress their authority because the content that they're presenting displays their authority. But this person will be a terrible follower for a person whose leadership relies on things like charisma, something that has nothing to do with the subject that they're purporting to be a leader in. Charisma, their packaging, their PR department, the fact that they've been deputized or authorized or given a certificate or a stamp or a title. And we can also say something about how this person would function as a leader. They're being asked or expected to lead in an authoritarian manner, they're going to fail. You know, if they're being asked to use their charisma or intimidation or something to make people follow them, well, they're going to not succeed at that because they're not good at that because they don't like it. The Sun and the Mars Janma-Janma, with this aspect, with this keyword that we're exploring, is how the leadership has to have its inherent strength and not go looking for strength from some other source. It has to be with its sibling. So just like we did with Ketu and Mercury and Magha, we can look at what nakshatra the Sun and Mars are in. Sun and Mars here are in Pushya. Pushya is nourishing. Pushya is parental and instructive. So that's why I was giving those particular examples, actually. The native's leadership and strength tends to exert itself in a parental or educational way, as a teacher, as a parent, as a guide. They will like the use of leadership when it's meant to protect a child, or to raise a child, or to protect somebody who doesn't know about something but is innocent. One more example of Janma-Janma is important to give, because don't forget that all the Tarabala conditions repeat themselves in 3 groups of 9. So besides just being in the same nakshatra, Janma-Janma Tarabala can also occur between planets that are in 9 nakshatras from each other, or 18. Because 9 and 18 are the mirror points for the 1. 1, 9, and 18 are the trine in nakshatras. So here's an example of this. It shows Janma-Janma Tarabala forming between points that are 9 nakshatra apart. The ascendant is in U.ashadha and Saturn is in Krittika. The ascendant represents physicality and Saturn represents reduction. So for this native, you would expect reduction and physicality to be getting along with each other like siblings do. So that means that this is the type of person who's minimalist in their physical needs. They are not motivated by getting more property, getting better stuff, getting better cars, etc. And it also says that, so just like siblings sometimes annoy each other, the natives should sometimes be annoyed or irritated by any attempt to minimize the importance of physicality. Physical, real things are real and practical, and this native wants things to have demonstrable, practical effects and proofs. Now, how do we apply nakshatra in this case? Because in this case, they're not in the same nakshatra. So what we do here is we apply the nakshatra to the planet that's in that nakshatra. So U.ashadha would affect the ascendant and Krittika would affect Saturn. U.ashadha is about mastering things. And since this affects the ascendant, it describes attaining mastery or control over physical, tangible things. Krittika is divisive, it's cutting, it's dissective. So since Krittika affects Saturn, it really describes cutting reduction. So this native has an apparently contradictory need to master the physical and also to cut themselves off from it decisively. So you often have to have good knowledge of a subject before you can find the right interpretation of it. I mean, besides your astrological knowledge, you have to know the subject. But if you know about the subject of physicality and cutting yourself off from it, detachment, you can reach the conclusion that this chart signifies the ability to master the physical by detachment from it, the attempt to master physical existence by disciplining it. So now I've given you 3 examples of Janma-Janma Tarabala and how to interpret those. Janma-Janma is just one of 5 nakshatra Tarabala pairs. I'll cover each pair separately over the next 4 episodes. Also, if you find this whole concept of Tarabala fascinating, which it really is, then you'll really love the newest report that I'm offering, which is 100% Tarabala report, and it's called Star Strength. That's what Tarabala can be translated as. And that report would lay out and help you interpret all the Tarabala pairs that are active in your chart. You can order one right now from my site, victikara.com. Thank you.